County. Daniel really didn't want to stay around and be a farmer, so he went west to join his brother Samuel. He went out on the Oregon Trail. His journey started at Vincennes, then Council Bluffs, Fort Kearny, Nebraska, Fort Hall, Oregon Territory, and finally Walla Walla, Washington. Daniel did lumbering, farming, mining, and focused on tractor and implement manufacturing. He had many ups and downs, but natural abilities and perseverance, he eventually did prosper. In 1870, he was at his brother's farm in Sutter County, California. Daniel saw the need and invented and patented a portable grain cleaner, because wheat at that time had to be hauled to a central location to be cleaned. Thrashing was just simply removing the kernel but not cleaning it at that time. And Daniel purchased the San Leandro Plow Works and started the Daniel Best Agricultural Works once he got himself established with the grain cleaner. In 1885, Daniel designed a traveling combined harvester. And harvesting at that time was either done by a stationary unit, which was powered by horses walking in a circle called a horsepower. And it just simply took the kernel of wheat off the stalk. And some farmers put a ground wheel on the stationary harvester. That ground wheel, bull wheel, would power the machine, pulled by animals, and it would cut the grain out in the field, would save cutting it and bringing it off the field. What Daniel did was put his fanning mill on the traveling harvester. And so it would cut, thrash, and clean, and this is where the term combined harvester comes into play. Horses and mules were used to pull this. Their ground speed was uneven. You go up a grade, they'd slow down a bit. Go down grade, they'd try and hold them back, but the speed would pick up. And that affected the speed of how the combined harvester worked. Too slow, it didn't clean the grain. Too fast, it'd throw it out the back chute. So Daniel patented a fan blast governor, which would maintain the proper cleaning speed, slow or fast. In 1886, Daniel sold his business and house in Oregon and moved to San Leandro. Daniel and Meta had 5 daughters and 1 son, CL. The house still stands today at 1315 Clark Street. That's Dan Best II in front. This was an easy walk for Daniel to the agriculture works. CL spent many hours at the plant watching all facets of operation, from design shop, foundry, machine shop, to assembly, sales, and to shipping. CL accompanied Daniel on deliveries. This is a quote from CL. "From 9 years old, I traveled freely with my dad. He hauled me all over the state. I recall talking with his only salesman, Peter Moy of Livermore. It was about this and that tractor which they had visited. Most of the talk, if not all, was behind some blacksmith shop. It was difficult to control the speed of a ground-driven harvester, and better power was needed. In Oregon, Marquis de Lafayette Remington was experimenting with a steam traction engine. In 1888, he brought it to San Leandro to demonstrate to Daniel Best, and he bought the manufacturing rights of that engine. This is a photo of a 110 horsepower Best that appeared in 1897. Prior to this, there were 3 models of various sizes, but the 110 was the most sophisticated traction engine that was ever built. It was double simple, which means it was a 2-cylinder, And on a steam engine, the piston is fairly narrow. It takes steam, it works both ways. It's double acting. And it had balanced piston valves. The common valve in a reciprocating steam engine was a flat D valve that worked back and forth for admission and exhausting, and it would work a dish into the valve ports after a period of time. The piston valves held true and did the same thing with a lot less wear. He also balanced them with steam that you could reverse the engine forward and reverse without any effort against the boiler pressure. It carried 160 to 200 pounds boiler pressure. It also had power steering. A little twin-cylinder steam engine up front would do the steering. You just had to take a lever and just go like that, a joystick. All his engines employed the upright boiler. This configuration allowed for maximum flexibility on ascending and descending grades, resulting in free steaming in any position. The upright design placed the firebox under the water-filled boiler to a safe water level over the crown sheet. The crown sheet in a boiler is the top sheet on the firebox, and it's imperative that that always stays covered. Upright boilers were used for hoists, fire pumpers, and cranes. While originally designed for ag use, BEST engines also were used for logging, freighting, and other applications. On February 8th, 1889, Daniel Best took a steam engine and powered a harvester. And in this case, what he did is he put an auxiliary engine on the harvester, and to power that auxiliary engine took steam off the boiler. And it's probably what you'd call the first power takeoff. The engines, as I said before, were good for many uses. Also, Daniel realized that steam was cumbersome. It required extra manpower. In 1891, he developed an oil vapor engine for small stationary jobs. But he had one built big enough that he put it into a steam traction running gear. Daniel filed patent for that in 1896. And near as I can tell, that's probably the earliest gas traction engine that I know of. In this picture, CL is on the left, Daniel is in the center. Daniel continued to innovate while CL absorbed everything about design, manufacture, and the business end of the company. CL attended the Oakland Business College, the Lick School of Mechanical Engineering, Anderson Academy for Mechanical Drawing in Irvington. But his lessons really were at 800 Davis Street at the plant. He learned that products should be built with quality materials, quality workmanship, pride, and backed by outstanding service. More expensive to buy or build and buy, cheaper to own and operate. This would become a backbone of his future companies. In 1896, at age 18, Daniel became buyer for the company. In 1898, he was superintendent. He interacted with farmers, miners, loggers, and freighters. He learned pluses and minuses of the best machines and competitors. In 1904, Daniel sues the Holt Manufacturing Company over infringement of the placement of the auxiliary steam engine on the harvester. The suit would drag on. In 1908, Best sells his company to the Holt Manufacturing Company for $325,000, with 2/3 interest going to Holt and CL retaining 1/3 and becoming president of the Best Manufacturing Company. The reasons for the sale: changing markets, litigation, cost of research and development for a small company, competitors testing self-laying tracks. Daniel was at age 70. Local newspapers report the sale put new life and vigor into the business. 1909 was a good year for the Holt-owned Best Manufacturing Company with a profit of approximately $90,000. In 1909 also, CL designed and built a combined harvester, and he named it after his daughter, which is the Betty Best right there. 2 new gas traction engines with Buffalo motors with the sale price of about $4,000 each were in production at that time. Letters between CL and Pliny Holt, Ben Holt's nephew and president of the Northern Holt Company of Minneapolis, were discussing profitability and the future of the company. CL and Pliny Holt had mutual respect for each other all through the years. But back at San Leandro, Holt employee F.O. Myers was usurping Best's authority as president and undermining CL. January 15th, 1910, C.L. Best resigned, citing loss of confidence in management, and Best forfeited a large sum of money in the process. February 18th, 1910, the Oakland Tribune announced Best will start a big plant at Elmhurst and setting the course for a new and amazing journey that would have many ups and downs. CL also knew that gray iron castings were weak. He was believing that steel castings would be much better, and there was nobody on the West Coast that could do that, so he bought and set up a Bessemer process steel converter for his own use, and he contracted out to other companies out there. And the first products for the new company was a wheel tractor. Best had been instrumental in the San Leandro tractor designed before he resigned. This is an example of what he was producing at the time. C.L. Best also designed electric combined harvester. It debuted at California State Fair in 1911. It was experimental. They were just unable to find a way to seal up the electric motors and generator and all that to keep the dust and grit out, so it was abandoned. The power for that came from a generator on the tractor, but it's too bad it didn't work. It was a great idea. He continued to build harvesters for a few years and eventually sold to the Harris Harvester Company of Stockton. Big tractors were heavy and cumbersome. They packed the ground. Weather could dictate just how good they could move in mud, a lot of times not. They were too big for orchard work, and also, you're dealing with compacting of soil. As early as 1907, CL investigated the concept of a self-laying track. The 1911 track-laying tractor called the ball tread appeared. It was experimental, but it didn't work to his expectations, so he dropped it. 1912, C.L. Best came out with the 70 horsepower track layer. It had a hinged, radially oscillating roller frame. This was superior to the rigid frame built by competitors. The oscillating roller frame was used in all future Best track layers and continued on to 1925 with the Caterpillar and still in use today. The 70 track layer also employed differential steering, which would reappear at Caterpillar in the 1980s. Larger sized tractors were not practical for the smaller operators. There was a demand for that. So Best designed and offered a 30 horsepower track layer nicknamed the Humpback, referring to the elevated sprocket design. This design would reappear in 1978 with the Caterpillar D10. The humpback was from the old school. It had a tiller wheel out front. CL at Elmhurst also designed the 816 pony track layer. It had no tiller wheel. Tractors at that time with no tiller wheel were called a muley, but for some reason it never went into production. That is CL on the tractor driving. His father took that picture and sent it to one of his brothers at Vincennes. It stayed in the family, and eventually we got a copy of it from Frank Best in Columbus Junction, Iowa. In 1913, the Holt-owned Best Manufacturing Company in San Leandro was closing down. Raw materials and machines were sent to Stockton. By 1915, CL's plant at Elmhurst was inadequate. May 1916, the Best Board of Directors were looking for a place to go, so they chose Melrose, California to build a new plant. Daniel Best approached CL and wanted him to move back to San Leandro, feeling it would be good for the city and workers. Daniel asked CL what it would take to get him back to San Leandro, and he said $20,000 if could be raised forward toward the purchase of the old Best plant, which was a $30,000 asking price. He would move back to San Leandro. In San Leandro, a meeting attended by 300 citizens raised $14,000 in pledges. Additional funds were raised. Daniel Best and Associates obtained an option for the land and presented the offer to the Best board. CL Best Gas Traction Company accepted this offer with one stipulation. They wanted a 20-foot high crane over Davis Street that would connect the two plants, and the city of San Leandro readily agreed for that. Demolition of the old buildings began June 28, 1916. Construction continued at a swift pace. On October 6, 1916, an open house was held with over 1,500 people attending in the main machine shop. C.L. Best, at that time now in San Leandro, would walk from his house through the almond orchard down the Southern Pacific tracks to his office. This would give him time to think about business and whatever patents he might be working on. The years 1915 to 1918 were challenging for the Best and his company. The Panama Pacific International, also known as the San Francisco World's Fair, opened February 20th, 1915. Holt had a 15,000 square foot display of an entire product line. Best featured 3 machines and 1 experimental. February 19th, one day before the fair's opening, the Holt Manufacturing sued the Best company for patent infringements over the self-laying track. Holt was not the owner of the Pioneer patent. There were quite a few examples of others. And what Best did is his attorney, H.C. Montgomery, went and bought the patent rights from Lombard in Maine. And a very clear example of the Lombard patent is the Phoenix over here. The suit would drag on for years, Best countering and other legal maneuvering. The Holt Company hired the premier patent law firm in San Francisco known as Thompson. And like I said, CL used H.C. Montgomery, just a one-man show. And he was a junior partner at the time when Daniel represented Daniel Best. 1916 saw the construction and outfitting of the new San Leandro facility. Production lines were expanded and refined. Better distribution network was formed. World War I caused a shortage of raw materials and slowed tractor production. Best was shut out of war production and concentrated on domestic designs and markets. Litigation with the Holts continued. A quote from Dan G. Best, CL's son, who was born in 1912. When I was a little kid sitting at the dinner table, the talk always went back to Holt. It was always Sue, Sue, Sue. That's all they ever seemed to talk about. In 1910, when Best started his company, he started with private investors. By 1917, they were dissatisfied with the expenses of putting up a new plant and the lawsuit and slow return of sales. They dumped their stock to C.A. Hawkins, who was sales manager of the White Sewing Machine Company of Cleveland, Ohio. He purchased 51% of the Best stock. He was elected president, and now CL was vice president of the company that he had founded. Best tried to conduct business as efficiently as possible, but roadblocks were thrown his way. Research and development of other tractors continued, and the beginning of the design of the 60 horsepower tractor began. I found this picture. This would be every collector's dream to have this one. This is a Best 120. Obviously, they made one. I don't know how many they made, but it was listed in 1917 and listed for $6,000. In 1918, with Hawkins still president of the Best company, loyal directors still on board viewed Hawkins as unpredictable and a threat. Hawkins had a habit of buying companies, using them, and then sell them for a profit. And the one thing that concerned Best, could he sell this present Best company to Holt, as happened in when Daniel sold to Holt in 1908. But the Hawkins era ended in December when he retired. He was forced out because CL and associates, through some financial maneuvering, were able to come up with stock to come ahead of Hawkins. He knew he was beat. He sold his stock and he resigned. 1918 was almost over. The Best and Holt companies were weary of time and money of lawsuits and were costing them a lot of money. Through intense negotiation, a compromise settlement was reached. The court issued the final decree December 30, 1918. The court said Holt was owner of the Pioneer patents. Best and Company did infringe on 12 claims. The court ordered that neither party could recover costs and there would be no more future litigation between the two companies. Taken at face value, Holt did prevail over the Best Company, but in the end, the Best Company came out ahead with the settlement. Holt would now have to defend its patent rights against other companies attempting to make track-type tractors. Future Best manufactured track-type tractors would bear a plate with the words the United States patents of the Holt Manufacturing Company, USA. Best licensing fee for the tractors produced. The Holt Company had to purchase CL's patents. CL sent Montgomery to Stockton, hoping to come back with $50,000 for that. And when Montgomery come back a few days later, he had a check for $200,000. While the Hawkins takeover was unsettling, it was a productive time for the inventor C.L. Best. he had time to refine his concept of a smaller, simpler, more maneuverable track-laying tractor and still provide the power demanded by Pacific Coast farmers. Best, at the time with longtime employee Byron Williford, set to work and they developed the Best 60. In comparison of the 60 in front of the 75, you can see them parked under the overhead crane at San Leandro. The 60 had power, balance, compactness, maneuverability. It had the proper length of track on the ground that it steered very easy and would do the same work as the tiller wheel. The new 60 horsepower track layer was powerful and rugged and simple in design. It used steel castings, 37 anti-friction bearings, Hyatt and Timken. The new tractor would be known as the Best Model 60 for its 60 belt horsepower and was destined to be CL's signature tractor. As the tractor would achieve more power through the years, it would be strengthened up, but it stayed in production until 1931. It was replaced by the 65 gas and diesel, which they in turn were replaced by the 70 gas and diesel, and the 70 diesel replaced by the 75 diesel. In August 1935, the RD8 appeared. So that is the evolution of the 60 up to the RD8. You go to the Heritage Center, there's a complete lineup. It's the only one you'll ever see. So do go visit that. Best, back in control of his company with $200,000 cash settlement from the lawsuit, Best had the tractor and funds that would establish his company into an industry leader, providing a strong beginning for a company to be formed in 1925. After rigorous demonstrations, the Best 60 track layer left the factory June 24th, 1919. Best 60 101A went to Milt Talbert at his ranch in Collinsville, which is in the Montezuma Hills just east of Oakland. There's a picture of Milt on the tractor and side hill harvesting. And also in the delta there was Van Sickle Island. They would put it on a barge, ferry it over to Van Sickle Island, and work down the marshy reeds and farm that land with vegetables. So Old 101 had a very active life for many years. CL learned a harsh lesson when he lost control of his company by having private investors. In 1919, he started anew, being a public traded company. He chose his inner circle and advisors very carefully. This management team assembled would be together even after the changes in 1925. It included C.L. Best, Harry H. Fair, B.C. Hickok, R.C. Force, and O.L. Starr. Early 1920s saw a general economic downturn in the country. By June 1920, the Federal Reserve had raised the interest rate to 7%. C.L. Best continued to develop and build tractors and even expanded his production facilities. The Best 30 was introduced in 1921. The Best 30 had the long undercarriage developed by CL. These patents and concepts are still in use today. The tracks employed drop-forged, heat-treated track links, also had heat-treated pins and bushings. When the pins and bushings were pressed into the track links, enough clearance was allowed for the track to revolve smoothly around the front idler and sprocket without consuming extra horsepower. The clearance between the pin and bushing is 15 thousandths. The press fit is a 10 thousandths interference fit. The rollers were a three-piece unit. The center was a steel casting. The rims were drop forged, heat treated, and shrunk on to the steel casting. This virtually eliminated roller breakage and extended the track wear. Another patent of CL's that comes a little bit later, the first 30s weren't built with this, was the recoil springs that are adjustable to give proper tension to the tracks. If a foreign object fouls the track, the springs will compress, and after the track is cleared, it will reset. This limited breakage and undue wear of the tracks. A good example is the Best 60 around the corner that was built around 1919, 1920, that didn't have those recoil springs, but it was put on, it was adapted. It was easily done on Best tractors. The final piece was the track shoe. Best patented that in 1928. And what he did was steel was alloyed at the steel mill and rolled into the shape of a track shoe in lengths of bars at the steel mill, then shipped to Caterpillar, and they were sheared to whatever width track shoe that was needed to be bolted onto the track chain. These patents are very important. They're pretty much still in use today. There's been modernization, but it's still the same concept. Also with the 30, it was a new design. It's almost, you could say, unit construction. It was simpler. It provided more power to the greater percentage of drawbar power than the 60 from the engine. And it would remain in production until 1932, and then the 35 gas and diesel came along, then the 40 gas and diesel, and then in August 1935, the RD6, and in 37 they just simply dropped the R in all those models, and it was the D6, D7, D8, so on. August 22nd, 1923, Daniel Best passed away at his residence in San Leandro after short illness. CL lost more than a father. He lost his early mentor and hunting partner. Daniel was wise counsel through CL's difficult years in helping him in his building his business. Daniel and CL spoke the same language, inventing and manufacturing. Years of hard work, difficult decisions were paying off. The Best 60 was in its 5th year of production. The 30 was making a strong showing. Before Daniel died, he was able to see what the future was going to hold for his son and the CL Best Tractor Company, just simply the best. Daniel Best II, standing next to his great father's burial vault in Oakland. 1923 marked an improvement in the U.S. economy. 1924 was a banner year for the Best Company. 1919, it had 15 dealerships. 1924, 50 dealerships, and 7 export outlets. In 1924, 26% more 60 tractors were produced than 1923. Also in 24, 91% more 30 tractors were produced than 1923. The company was so successful, they awarded 3 extra stock dividends in 1923. That is the sign of a very healthy company. Others were starting to take notice of CL Best Tractor Company. From the Holt Manufacturing Sales Report from 1924, we thoroughly believe that 1925 will be the most critical year. If the best company makes as much progress as it has in the next 12 months as it has in the past 2, our volume will be menaced. With the premier products and expanding production, solid financial backing, progressive corporate leadership, CL Best Tractor Company kept moving forward with its drive to be the dominant track layer, track type manufacturer. With only manufacturing at the plant in San Leandro on the Pacific Coast, transportation of products and materials was an issue. Even with added cost, the best track layers were increasing their market share. Informal and cautious meetings were held at Best's inner circle about expanding to the east, and the target was East Peoria. One of the reasons is O.L. Starr was a production engineer that worked for Best. As the tough times hit Best in 1917, Starr got an offer from Pliny Holt to come to Peoria and get production up on the Holt tractors for the war effort. So Starr knew the Holt plant. And after the war ended, he did come back to CL. So they knew what they were looking at. And now here's a little thing we got from CL's son about the change from the black to the gray. It must have been late 1924 or early 1925 that Dad decided the color of the 60 needed to change. He talked to someone in a Navy yard at Oakland and found out they had lots of surplus battleship gray paint. He got a good deal on it, so the 60 went from black, and now it's gray, and that's how it stayed. The end of World War I brought hard times to the Holt Manufacturing Company. During war years, almost exclusively, they made tractors for the war effort. Little effort was put into research and development. At the end of the war, Holt was caught with a large inventory of machines and parts. They made few changes to the product line at the Peoria plant. Company founder Benjamin Holt died in 1920 at age 71. In 1924, the Stockton and Peoria plants were only running at 60%. Short-term bank notes were coming due at $5.6 million. Harry Fair, who was an investment banker on CL's board since 1919, started negotiations with the Holt Company. CL stayed away from this because of past history with the two companies. If approved, a third company, neither Best or Holt, would take control of all operations. Headlines from the February 28, 1925 morning edition of the Stockton Independent said it all. Holt Company control bought by CL Best tractor heads. The new Caterpillar Tractor Company, initially headquartered in San Francisco, was incorporated April 15, 1925. The Holt Company provided the name Caterpillar, while the CL Best Tractor Company provided the technology and the product to move the company into the future. The Oakland Tribune article on April 17th reported that the executive management of the Caterpillar Tractor Company will be largely in the hands of the men who have been responsible for the success of the Best Company. Of the 9 men on the board, only 2 were from Holt, Murray Baker and Pliny Holt. 5 members of the executive board had been together since 1919, would stay together until 1951. The Holt Company stockholders met on May 4th in Stockton and ratified the actions recommended by the board of directors. The CL Best Tractor Company stockholders met a day later on May 5th in San Leandro and ratified the recommendations by the board, and what this was to dissolve both companies. On May 14th, 1925, the Best and Holt companies ceased to exist and all plants and business and assets and liabilities were now assumed by the Caterpillar Tractor Company. When employees in San Leandro and Stockton and Peoria reported the work, they had many questions. Who would stay, where would they stay, and what would they be making? The 30 and 60 tractors continued in San Leandro. The 2, 5, and 10-ton continued in Peoria, while the plant was geared up to produce the now Caterpillar 30 and 60. All models were painted gray with red lettering and a red wavy line. By November 1925, the 10-ton was dropped from production. The 5-ton was discontinued in 1926. The new company retained from the Holt Company the Caterpillar Tractor School, providing training and servicemen and customer education. Very popular and expanded. By mid-1925, the corporate headquarters were moved to the former Best home in San Leandro. All that is left of the old plant is the arched doorway, moved several blocks away from Davis Street. The late 1920s showed phenomenal growth. Previous company's debts were paid off. The new company had 2,528 employees at the end of 1925, paid $2.9 million in wages, salaries, and benefits. The new tractors were also in development. The plants were running at full strength. Back in 1915 at the San Francisco World's Fair, CL saw a stationary engine and thought it was a diesel engine, thought someday it could power a tractor. He kept tabs on diesel engine development around the world. Best stood fast against skeptics in the company that the diesel would be the company's power of the future. And CL said, when the diesel tractor is ready, Caterpillar is going to have it. Testing continued even through the disastrous years of the early 30s. Best held firm that the motive power of the future was going to be the diesel, and he would not even consider the thought of quitting. The Caterpillar Diesel 60 tractor was announced to dealers on August 31st, 1931. With the diesel in production, the undercarriage issues resolved, the company prospering, a quality leadership team, CL Best, dropped away from day-to-day operations of the Caterpillar Tractor Company. Now we'll take a look at the man, Leo Best. Leo was active in San Leandro. In 1897, the amateur orchestra of San Leandro was organized. Leo was librarian and played clarinet. Leo made the list of eligible young men for girls to choose from that was published in a local paper. He was also fire chief on the city council and library and church boards. Leo organized the first baseball club in San Leandro, and he played shortstop. His company would later sponsor the semi-professional team, the Best Tractors. There was a spirited rivalry between the Best Tractors and the Holt Caterpillars. December 11th, 1900, Leo married Pearl Gray. They had 2 children, Elizabeth, Betty, whom the combined harvester is named after, born in 1907. Daniel Gray Best, born 1912. The family owned or moved to the A.C. Peach property, which included the Peralta house. It was from here that Leo walked to work, through the orchard and down the railroad tracks to his office in San Leandro. Current street signs noting the influence of the Bests. This photo shows clearly clearing the almond trees from the Best property. Leo is standing next to that power pole. And this is a quote from his son. Dad had a 60 brought up from the factory. It wasn't that far. I remember it had street plates on the tracks. Dad had put in an old radiator core and a used fuel tank. And I remember that the tractor wasn't at all painted. When the work was done, they took it back to the factory, changed the radiator and the fuel tank, and finished painting it. As Sue and I were viewing this picture of Dan, he looked up with a twinkle in his eye and he come up with this: "You don't suppose some poor bastard paid a new price for a used machine?" Another quote from Dan: "While the 60 was working at the Peachy place, Dad told the operator to put me up there and show me how to drive it. My friends and I saw how it was started, and so later when no one was around, we decided we would start it and drive it around. I had to put both hands on a steering clutch lever and brace my foot against the column that pulled the lever. We drove it all around and made sure, though, when we were done, to park it exactly where it had been. Of course, we didn't think about the tracks we made." With the stress of starting a new business and later moving it to San Leandro, the Hawkins takeover, the court battles, Leo found peace in hunting and fishing and trips to the Sierra Nevada. Whenever they would go, a lot of times Daniel would drive with his twin six-packard, and when they get there, they'd pack in by horses. The following photos are from family albums. A quote from Dad: "I remember packing into the Sierras to go hunting. I'd wake up at night and look over to where Dad was supposed to be sleeping. You could see the red tip of his cigarette glowing as he was sitting up and thinking. He was always thinking. Even in the house, he would be staring into space, and I knew, leave him alone, because he was working on some kind of project." Here's a picture of Leo flipping flapjacks. Leo and friend hunting bounty. Here's Billy the caterpillar horse, named after the white wavy patch on its rear. Leo bought this horse because of the white patch. Leo standing by his car, and here's old Daniel standing on the porch, packed and ready to go. Daniel always went hunting and fishing with a three-piece suit and a tie. Very formal. Leo had many interests. His ranch at Livingston, California, where he raised show horses, cattle, hogs, and he also had two other ranches. He conducted oil exploration in California and Nevada. He owned the Ruby Gold Mine near Downeyville, California from 37 to 42 when the government froze gold prices. The CL Best Nugget Collection has 159 nuggets weighing nearly 1,000 ounces, assaying 96% pure. Largest nugget weighs 3.35 pounds. The Sierra County collection is a replica of the original collection. The real nuggets are in a natural history museum, I believe, in LA. After their divorce in 1930, his now former wife, Pearl, and children, Betty and Dan, moved to Woodland. At 18 years of age, Dan tried college but had no time for it and just told his dad he wanted to farm. So Leo bought a ranch that's still in the best name, and they became partners. Various experimental tractors were arrived at the ranch over the years, but they were not used in experiments there. They had already done their experimenting in San Leandro, and they were parked in the back lot, not being used. So CL would send them up to Dan, and Dan would run them for years, and some of them remained there until the early 70s. When Dan retired, unfortunately, they were scrapped. The shop was constructed with an overhead crane from the original Best Manufacturing Company. The shop tools were salvaged from the Holt plant in Stockton. The shop still stands, is still being used today. The partnership continued until 1948 when Dan bought out Leo's share. Dan continued to farm and sold out to his son in the early 70s. The younger Dan continued until his death, 2024. Leo continued to put his never-ending designs on paper. The one on the left is from 1937, showing the rear-mounted engine tractor, a design that Caterpillar didn't use until the mid-1980s. The duck decoy is a sketch he made for his granddaughter Brenda when she asked him, "Grandfather, invent something for me. I want to be a millionaire." In September 1951, Leo and Dan were planning their, that would be son Dan, planning their annual hunting trip. It was in September. Leo wasn't feeling well at this time. He didn't want to put off the trip, but Dan says, "You better go in and get things checked out." And Leo said, "Well, then I'll do that, but you guys go hunting." So they did. And it was a Saturday morning, a little after breakfast. Dan said, "I heard a plane, and then I saw it. I knew it wasn't anything good. The pilot found us, circled us, then dropped the rock. A piece of paper was tied to the rock. It said Dad was dead. We had to break camp, saddle horses, and head back." Clarence Leo Best, inventor, businessman, tractor builder, husband and father, was dead at 73 years of life, 54 years of tractor manufacturing, 26 years as chairman of the board of an ever-expanding and innovating Caterpillar tractor company. He went from horses to the refined power of the D8 tractor, from the fledgling company that maintained its existence with courage and determination to a company known and respected around the world. CL met life challenges with tenacity, fortitude, quiet self-assurance, with a perseverance and hard work that challenge could be transformed into triumphs. A quote from CL, in his own words, "If you haven't found the answer yet, you haven't worked hard enough." Another one that he made in 1944 to his brother-in-law, he said, "Someday tractors will be powered by the sun." Thank you. Thank you. Any questions? Well, CL's son, unfortunately. But there was a stipulation there. He was not supposed to sell them. So, he honored his father's request. There was a diesel 70 there. Yeah. Yep. And what happened to it, it was up at the Ruby mine. It was a 1X. It was an experimental tractor. And when the mine closed down, he shipped it down to his son. You go buy that power unit, you put it into that 70 tractor, you will have